My sister banned my husband from her wedding. We showed up anyway. Her fiancé shoved him in front of everyone, and then posted lies online. My sister and I have always had an up-and-down relationship. We adored each other, but we were not the type of sisters to share every idea or secret. We'd had some disagreements certainly, but they were usually about trivial matters or differing perspectives on family roles. But altogether I adored her. I was pleased with her accomplishments, supported her, and had been at her side through every life event thus far. We had a really nice connection until this wedding disaster. I've been married to Dan for about 4 years, and he fits in well with our family. Dan was the type of guy who made an effort to connect with the people I cared about, and I admired that. Because he had no siblings, he treated my sister as if she were his own, and they shared a light-hearted bond that reminded me of bickering siblings. They were constantly teasing each other, and he was always there for her when she needed it. She had been battling with a business venture for about a year. She wanted to start a modest, online jewelry company, and Dan provided her an interest-free loan to help her get started. It was a significant sum, and I was glad that he was prepared to help her. So when her wedding invitation arrived with that bizarre note asking me not to bring Dan, I was utterly taken off guard. It felt like a slap in the face, given how close they were. I read the note at least 5 times, trying to figure out whether it was a joke, or if I had missed some hidden message. Dan laughed it off at first, assuming she was planning some sort of wedding prank on him, but something about it didn't sit right with me. I attempted to contact her directly by texting her a few casual questions about the wedding, but she was vague in her responses, stating she was busy planning and would call back later. Since I couldn't obtain a clear answer from her, I decided to phone my mother. When I inquired whether she'd heard anything about Dan not being invited, she just laughed and replied, "Oh, you know how your sister is. She's just being her silly self." She assumed my sister was preparing something humorous for the reception. Her reaction was unhelpful and simply added to my uncertainty. My mother didn't appear to take it seriously, so I assumed it was simply a harmless prank. I was still unsure, but I couldn't see how bringing him would cause any significant harm. After all, it was a wedding. It was intended to be a happy occasion, a time for family to gather, not strange constraints and mind games. We arrived at the wedding location together. As soon as we went in, some folks gave us strange stares. I tried to dismiss it, focusing on the joy of the day. I believed they were merely observing us since Dan and I had dressed more professionally than normal to show respect for the big day. Then I saw my sister. She was in the middle of a chat with several of her bridesmaids, but when her gaze fell on Dan, her entire countenance transformed. Her face plummeted, and then changed into a startlingly angry expression. She stormed over, her voice trembling with rage as she demanded why Dan was there. She did not try to keep her voice quiet. Everyone around us could detect the sharpness in her voice. The atmosphere was strained and I felt heat rise to my face, embarrassed by her reaction. I tried to pull her aside for a private conversation, but she insisted he wasn't supposed to be there and that I was violating her desires. In an attempt to calm her down, I reminded her that the note seemed like a prank, and even Mom thought so. I asked her to take a breath and tell me what the real problem was, but she didn't respond directly. Instead, she began yelling harder, accusing me of attempting to spoil her day. Her fiancé noticed the noise and rushed in. I expected he'd try to mediate and calm her down. Instead, he quickly took her side, standing protectively next to her and staring at Dan. Then, out of nowhere, he stepped up and gave Dan a hard shove, telling him to go immediately. I was extremely surprised. The issue had escalated well beyond my expectations, and I was divided between protecting my husband and keeping what little peace I could still have with my family. But by that point, things had gone too far. With a broken heart, I grasped Dan's hand and departed the event. That night, I was in disbelief. Dan was quiet, and while he didn't say it out loud, I could tell he was sad. He hadn't intended to cause a scene or upset anyone. We truly believed we were not doing anything illegal. Later that night I tried phoning my mother and sister, wanting to clear things up and apologize for whatever unstated boundaries we had violated. But no one responded. 2 days later, Dan handed me his phone and urged me to look at a post written by my sister's husband. I opened it to find a long, furious rant, in which he highlighted degenerate people attempting to disturb our day, and stated that some people were plainly fascinated with him and his wife. He didn't name us, but it was clear who he was referring to. Seeing it spread out for all to see seemed like a betrayal. Here was this man, who should have been hospitable to families, openly accusing us of doing something nasty simply because we showed up. It was humiliating and hurtful, and it made me feel helpless. I tried to contact my sister and mother again, expecting that now that the wedding stress had passed, they might be willing to chat. However, my calls were unanswered. All I want to know is what I did wrong. Was I the wrong person for believing my husband would be welcomed? Should I have taken that note seriously, no matter how ludicrous it seemed? I felt I was giving her respect by showing up and being there for her big day. Nevertheless, everything I'd done appeared to have backfired. I told a few close friends, and they were as shocked as I was. They couldn't understand why my sister and her husband reacted so aggressively. Then one acquaintance stated something I hadn't considered, that her spouse might be jealous of Dan's friendship with her, or feel intimidated by his presence. It didn't make total sense to me, but it was the only plausible explanation. Since that post, I have not heard from my sister, or her husband. My family appears to be divided, with some members reaching out to express their regret for what transpired while remaining neutral. It's heartbreaking to realize that my family was dragged into this mess, because I didn't take my sister's note seriously. Now, I'm doubting every decision and conversation, wondering if I should have known better. The worst part is that I feel like I've lost not only my sister, but also my feeling of family unity. I never wanted to create a fuss, or make her special day about anything other than her enjoyment. Now all I have are regrets and questions that I may never have answered. So, Reddit, I'm left wondering, was I wrong to invite Dan? Did I miss a warning sign that I should have seen? Or was I correct in thinking that families should be free to share each other's life without unstated restrictions and harsh reactions? I'm bewildered and confused, and I'm not sure if I'll ever fully comprehend how something that began as a wonderful occasion turned out this way. Update 1. Hello everyone. First and foremost, I appreciate all of your comments and support. I was blown away by how many of you have had similar experiences, and it's reassuring to know I'm not alone in this. Some of your stories have been eye-opening, and they have helped me make sense of the insane events that have occurred. Unfortunately, what I'm experiencing with my family right now is the polar opposite of healing or understanding. After the wedding, we didn't hear from anyone for several days. It was like this strange silence, and I began to assume that perhaps they simply wanted space. Dan and I both assumed they'd come around eventually. But then, out of nowhere, our phones became inundated with text messages. It was as though the floodgates had opened. Messages from relatives, friends, and even people I hadn't spoken to in years, and they weren't offering support or understanding. They were calling me everything from a homewrecker to a spoiled child who had destroyed my sister's wedding day. Some of the texts were so cruel and bizarre that I initially thought they were jokes. But then I realized how serious these people were. One message from a cousin read, "If you loved your sister, you wouldn't have pulled a stunt like that at her wedding." Another family accused me of attempting to spoil the wedding because I was jealous of my sister's happiness. Her husband's social media posts appear to have caused a ripple effect. In his post, he claimed that I was obsessed with their connection, which sparked a frenzy among individuals who assumed the worst of me without even asking for my side. To make matters worse, he implied that I had gone out of my way to disgrace them by coming there with Dan, despite my sincere belief that it was all a misunderstanding. It grew so severe that Dan's own family learned about it. They had been friendly with my sister and were surprised at how things had turned out. His mother even contacted my mother to attempt to clarify matters, only to be told that I had made my bed, and now had to lie in it. My mother's words, apparently. Dan's mother told me this, and I was distraught. My own mother was on my side, believing the horrible lies I told to outshine my sister on her special day. I also began to notice an unusual trend in these messages from family members. Everyone seemed to buy the story that I was obsessed with my sister's spouse, that I was attempting to insert myself into their life, or had some ulterior motive. It sounded ludicrous, yet folks I'd known my entire life appeared to believe it. And all of this was so terrible and strange because, as I already stated, my husband Dan was like a brother to my sister. They had always shared a sibling bond, nothing more. People were now implying that I had used Dan on purpose to damage her. Meanwhile, my sister had yet to contact me. She was utterly ghosting me, letting her new husband do the talking through his nasty post, and allowing our family to rip me apart. In desperation, I contacted her best friend, thinking she could provide some insight. Her friend informed me she couldn't say much, but she did remark that my sister had been battling with pre-wedding anxieties, and had been heavily impacted by her fiancé's perspective on family dynamics. Apparently, he has a history of possessive behavior, and even had problems with some of her friends prior to the wedding. That small piece of knowledge set my head racing. What if he was trying to cut her off from her family, beginning with me? A few days later, my greatest fears were realized. A spiteful cousin who has always liked to stir the pot provided me with a screenshot of another post by my sister's husband. And this time, he went even farther, stating unequivocally that he was grateful to finally be free of certain toxic family members who had been attempting to influence his new wife. He hinted that Dan and I were involved in some sort of vengeance against them, and that he was forced to defend his wife from our shenanigans. I could not believe it. Not only was he spreading lies, but he was also making it sound like we had a long history of being toxic to my sister. It was terrifying and embarrassing. Worst of all, people were gobbling it up. All of this had spread to mutual friends who had nothing to do with the family, and I was beginning to feel isolated in my own town. Despite the outrage, I couldn't let it go. I felt compelled to confront my sister and ask her directly what she thought of everything that was said about me. So I called her one final time. She didn't answer, but a few hours later I received a text from her with the following message. "You crossed a line. You can't come back from this. I hope you're happy with the choices you made." The text felt like the end of our relationship. I was startled and heartbroken, trying to figure out how everything had come apart so quickly. Part of me wanted to go on social media to share my side of the story and defend myself against these heinous charges. But Dan begged me to remain silent, reminding me that it would only fuel the flames. And as much as that stung, I knew he was correct. If I started defending myself online, I'd simply appear guilty, as if I had anything to conceal. But it wasn't just about me by this time. Dan was also caught up in this situation. He told me that his own friends, some of whom had seen the post, had contacted him, questioning why he had fallen to that level by showing up. People who had no information about the note or the background had already portrayed him as a disruptive force. It's difficult to put into words how angry, betrayed, and sad I feel. My husband has been nothing but kind to my sister, but now he's being dragged through the muck. And, as much as I want I could go back in time and avoid going to that wedding, a part of me believes this would have happened anyhow. It's evident now that her husband was determined to isolate her, and it appears that I was only the first in line to be disconnected. In some ways, I feel as if I've lost not only my sister, but my entire family, as a result of one mistake that was blown out of proportion. I'm now the homewrecker, the toxic family member, the one who's allegedly concerned with upsetting other people's happiness, and all I did was come there to support my sister's wedding. Update 2. There has been a lot going on that I was unaware of until recently. And after a furious talk with my mother, I'm starting to see the situation in a new, troubling perspective. I decided to pay her a visit since I couldn't let things escalate without at least attempting to talk them out. I wanted to clear up the lies and figure out why my family was so readily misled by these damaging rumors. When I arrived, my mother was defensive, repeating what relatives had been saying, that I was seeking attention and making a commotion at the wedding, even calling me a homewrecker for causing trouble in my sister's new marriage. It was the same laundry list of accusations that had been leveled against me for weeks. But she said something that made me freeze in my tracks. "You should have handled things better, especially given how your husband feels about your sister." I wasn't prepared. What exactly was she talking about? I asked my mother to explain what she meant by my husband's affections for her. My mother's expression remained unchanged, and I felt my heart sink into my stomach. She began telling, almost casually, how my sister had been concerned about Dan's feelings, and how that fear had grown since her engagement. It turns out that when my sister got engaged to Trent, she shared with him the relationship she had with Dan, which we all perceived as a sibling bond. But Trent, as I discovered via my mother's remarks, saw things differently. He obviously persuaded her that Dan was drawn to her, and could not be trusted. According to Trent, my husband was madly in love with my sister, and he didn't want anyone who loved his bride to attend their wedding. When I asked my mother why she would even consider such a preposterous concept, she shrugged and said that sometimes people hide their feelings effectively, meaning that my husband had been hiding some secret love for my sister all these years. That was absurd. I wanted to laugh, but instead I was filled with rage. Trent's envious anxiety made the brother-sister bond Dan and my sister had always had seem twisted and unnatural. And it wasn't just Trent's notion. My sister and even my mother had been seduced by this wrath. I sat there shivering, wondering how my mother could possibly believe Dan, who had treated my sister with nothing but compassion, would have a secret goal. She claimed she had spotted indicators she hadn't noticed previously, such as when he would lend her money or rush to her aid if she needed it. I could not believe that simple acts of compassion were being turned into something dirty. My mother didn't stop there. She went on to tell me that when my sister first expressed her concerns about Dan, she tried to protect her by staying away from him. Trent apparently informed her that Dan was infatuated and would always pose a threat to their relationship. Trent had even urged her to remove herself from me, claiming that I was fostering Dan's alleged obsession by constantly bringing him around. I couldn't believe what I heard. Trent seemed to have planted seeds of doubt in my sister's mind, changing her perception of Dan, and by extension me. He'd fabricated a story in which Dan and I were both attempting to ruin their happiness. And it was working. I attempted to reason with my mother, telling her that none of this made sense, that Dan had no reason to be in love with my sister, and that we'd all been getting along fine before Trent arrived around. But she would not listen. She insisted Trent saw things others don't, and was only trying to protect my sister. I left her house that day feeling more hurt than before. Trent's jealousy had not only ruined my connection with my sister, but it had also corrupted my mother. Following that, I returned home and told Dan everything. He was speechless. He couldn't believe that his sister-like relationship with her had evolved into this warped story. He remembered every time he'd assisted her, even when he believed he was simply being a helpful brother-in-law, and how those memories suddenly seemed contaminated. He was frustrated, trying to understand how a man he hardly knew had managed to turn my family against us by using jealousy as a weapon. Later, I texted my parents, telling them they could believe anything they wanted, but I had already explained and supported my side. I informed them that I was aware that Dan was being falsely accused, and that if there had been any validity to the accusation, I would have been the first to address it. They needed to understand that I wouldn't stand by him solely because he was my husband. I would never endorse something so heinous if it were real. I went on to add that these charges were ridiculous and extremely painful, and that it spoke a lot about them that they chose to side with their new son-in-law, without providing any real evidence, or even giving Dan or me the benefit of the doubt. It's one thing to support your children, but this, trusting Trent's story without evidence and turning against their own family, was too far. Dan and I didn't have the time or energy for such foolishness, and I wasn't going to sit back and let this absurd, unsubstantiated drama drag us down. I told them that if they wanted to believe in something so stupid, it was their decision. But we didn't want to be a part of this toxic circus anymore. For the time being, we're waiting to see if they'll change their minds or continue to prioritize this false narrative over us. I honestly don't know what will happen next. Update 3. Hello everyone. Things have taken an unexpected turn for the better, though it is still difficult to grasp everything that has occurred. My parents seemed shaken when I sent them that message. I believe they eventually realized how twisted and out of character all these charges were. They took it upon themselves to contact some of our family and discuss all that had happened. I'm not sure what was said during those meetings, but whatever it was, they must have realized how weird and ridiculous Trent's assertions were. Since then, I've gotten apologies from many family members, including cousins, aunts, and uncles. Some even apologized for leaping to judgments before speaking with me. As much as I appreciate them admitting their error, it still aches. I don't like how many of them were willing to believe such a stupid scenario. The idea that they thought Dan was acting inappropriately all along, especially with someone he considered his sister, hurts. I'm delighted they're coming around, but I can't pretend it doesn't make me bitter. But all of it went into the background yesterday night, as something even more unexpected occurred. My sister showed up at my house unexpectedly. She appeared to have been through a lot. Her hair was a mess, her eyes were red from crying, and she appeared to have not slept. Despite everything, she is my sister, and seeing her like that broke my heart. I unlocked the door and allowed her in, hoping we could talk and possibly get to the bottom of things. As soon as she sat down, she began crying. Once she had calmed down, she began narrating what had happened to Trent. She told me that she and Trent had just had a heated dispute, which had caused her to see things differently. Through her tears, she confessed that Dan was not the first person Trent had accused of being interested in her. Apparently, this had been going on for a while. While Trent's actions initially appeared innocent, perhaps even flattering in a bizarre sense, she claimed it began when they were out in public, and Trent noticed random males allegedly glancing at her. He'd make tiny remarks about how other males were staring at her improperly. And, while it felt uncomfortable, she assumed he was simply being protective. His behavior, however, became more severe with time. His allegations began to appear in practically every setting, and his attention switched to the individuals in her life, particularly Dan. When he started talking about Dan, he was quite convincing. Trent made it sound like he was truly concerned, as if he was simply looking out for her and wanted to keep her safe from anything unpleasant. He kept bringing it up, and she trusted him enough to go along with it. That is why, when he insisted Dan not attend the wedding, she did not challenge it. She believed she was doing the right thing by listening to her fiancé's fears and following his wishes. However, things took a turn for the worst following their wedding. Trent had begun to accuse an increasing number of individuals of having affections for her, and it was no longer just passing comments. He'd started pressuring her to quit her job, stating one of her male co-workers had eyes for her, and it wasn't safe for her to be near him. She knew that this was not typical at all. Trent was pressuring her to give up her independence and exclude individuals from her life, isolating her. It was no longer only about Dan or chance encounters. It was about having control over who she was and who she surrounded herself with. She felt surprised, deceived, and betrayed when she realized that his so-called protectiveness was actually obsessive and manipulative conduct. She recognized she'd been trapped by his domineering style and said she felt foolish for not noticing it sooner. My sister was obviously heartbroken and ashamed of how she had treated us. She apologized to me, and I could sense regret in her eyes. She also apologized to Dan, explaining how her confidence in Trent had led her to believe all he said, and how she had made a big mistake. For the first time, I could see how deeply she was pained by what she had done, and I knew she truly regretted it. She is currently staying with us to give herself some space and decide what she wants to do next. I know this is a really difficult moment for her, and it's awful to watch her go through it. But at the same time, I'm relieved that the truth has finally come out. My spouse no longer has to endure the burden of false charges, and my family can recognize Trent's behavior for what it is. Whatever happens, I'm ready to be there for my sister. I'm still absorbing everything, but I'm relieved that the truth has finally been revealed, and we can move ahead. Update 4. Hello everyone. I know many of you have asked for an update, so I apologize for the lack of communication. It's been a busy, emotional few months, and a lot has changed. Last time I explained how my sister came over to my house and realized how controlling Trent was. She returned to him, determined to keep her work and not be pushed around anymore. When she told him, however, he went utterly crazy. He accused her of being unfaithful, claiming that if she wanted to continue working, she had to be interested in other men. His reaction was so powerful and uncontrollable that she left again and returned to me, distraught as ever. It was heartbreaking to see her go through this, but it also seemed to give her some perspective. Over the next week, we talked a lot, and she came to recognize that this was no longer a relationship she desired. She made the tough decision to end things and file for divorce. Trent, as expected, reacted negatively. He turned up at my house, pleading and crying, saying that he would change and never act like this again. It was difficult to witness, especially because he appeared truly sorry. But my sister held her ground. She understood that his behavior had crossed so many boundaries that there was no way back to a position of trust. So, in brief, my sister is now going through a divorce. She is going through a terrible period, but I am doing my best to support her. Dan has been keeping his distance, which is understandable. Everything that has happened has put a strain on their relationship, but he remains supportive and checks in on her because he understands she needs all the help she can receive right now. My parents have also stepped up. They've been assisting her with legal matters and providing her with emotional assistance, which has made a significant difference. They've also used this opportunity to apologize to Dan and myself, particularly Dan, for ever believing Trent's charges. It's as if they finally understood how out of touch everything was. To be honest, it's been a difficult trip, but I'm grateful for the clarity it has provided. My sister is doing better, despite the difficulties, and my family has become closer in certain respects. I'd like to thank everyone here for their encouragement and support. It was reassuring to read your words, which encouraged us to be strong and trust in ourselves.